Good evening and welcome to Bobcat Breakdown, brought to you by the Quinnipiac Bobcat Sports Network. I'm your host, Arthur Balin, and joining me today are some of our finest analysts, Connor Voss, Connor Fortier, and the man, the myth, the legend, Shane Doyle. Gentlemen, welcome. We'll start with volleyball. The volleyball team has had a fantastic week last week, beating Ryder and St. Peter's in MAC play. Gentlemen, what do you think was the key to success in that game?
Well, I think that the play of the freshmen has been really instrumental for all these matches so far, especially in MAC play. They've really played well so far, and I think Emma Ogden had got Rookie of the Week this week, and she's been really important so far. And when you have a young team, you got to try and take leaps as you go. So I think this was a big weekend for the Bobcats.
Yeah, and like you said, it's definitely been started with the freshmen. The freshmen have done everything they can to really lead this team to victories. And so far in the MAC, they're 2-3, and each of the players on the team has done a great job. The freshmen more so than anybody. They've had so many amazing plays. They've really done anything. Katie Uricki had an unbelievable amount of kills in her most recent game, and she stepped up. We haven't seen a lot of her too far this year, but in the last game she's done unbelievably well. And although they're 2-3 in the MAC so far, it looks like they're going to get better and better as the season progresses.
Yeah, certainly you have to look at the freshmen for this one. I mean, Katie Uricki had 17 kills in the last game. That's the most, like Connor said, that's the most since any Quinnipiac players had since 2010 when Taylor Payne got 19 in a game. Jamie Palucci, another big hitter for them. You know, she almost got close to that mark against Ryder with 13 kills. And like you said, Emma Ogden, she's got 84 assists in the last two matches. So she's been a huge part of this volleyball and their streak that they're on.
And don't forget about Allison Lee, really playing good up front, a lot of blocks up front and a lot of kills. So she's been real good. And then you have to look to the seniors. Even though there's not a lot of upperclassmen, Logan Reicher's really played well, the fifth-year senior. So she's been the leader of the young group, and I think she's doing an outstanding job.
Well, you mentioned a lot about the freshmen on the team, Katie Uricki, Emma Ogden, and you mentioned Shane, Allison Lee. How important do you think freshmen have been this year so far?
Well, they've been extremely important. You have 6 of them on the team, so they're going to have to play a lot. They played a ton, so they're getting a ton of experience so far in their freshman year. And going forward, I see them improving drastically, not even throughout this season. And going forward, I think the sky's the limit for this program.
Yeah, you want to go on?
Of course. That's one of the things about this team is that the best players that we've seen so far, success-wise, have been the freshmen, and that's an incredible thing. The freshmen still have the rest of this year as well as 3 more years to go after that, so they're gaining an incredible amount of experience this year and can only get better and better and better. And now in the MAC, with greater competition than they've had so far in previous years, this is all the freshmen know. They've played against the best competition that the upperclassmen on the team have played. So really, they're going to continue to get better and continue to play unbelievably well, and they've been integral so far to this team.
Yeah, the fact that they've already doubled their wins since last season, like we said, 7 freshmen on the team. You said MAC competition is much better than the NEC, and they already have 2 of those wins in the MAC. So I think the sky's the limit realistically for this team. The fact that there's so many freshmen and they have 3 more years to bond with each other is just a huge thing.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll take a short break. Coming up on Breakdown, we'll look at the men's soccer team as they start the in-conference portion of their season. We'll be right back on Breakdown. Welcome back to Breakdown, where we go from the court to the pitch. Men's soccer began play on Saturday, hosting Iona College. The game ended in a 0-0 draw. So, guys, what did you get from the game against Iona on Saturday?
I got that they still can't score. Yeah, they've had trouble doing that. If people haven't realized, Borjan Goita's really carrying the team. You have Brandon Straingood on the back end, really helping this team get ties. But ties can only take you so far, and they're going to eventually have to try and get some wins if they want to be. Because I think this team defensively is good enough to play in the upper echelon of the MAC, but offensively they aren't there yet. And I think there are spots where they need to improve. Obviously, they've only had 2 people score so far, so they need more people to help out offensively to make them a legitimate MAC threat.
Yeah, that's been a theme all season for the Bobcats, is not scoring. The thing about the game against Iona, though, is that they had plenty of opportunities to score. A lot of the balls ended up on the net. Justin Ward had a few opportunities to score. I know James Doig was putting a few balls in that were getting headed, but Julian Petrello, the goalie for Iona, made some unbelievable saves I haven't seen from any team so far this season. So the offense is there. The opportunities were there. And against any other team, they would have scored. But that was just an unfortunate run-in with a very talented goalie.
So you think they're pretty close to breaking through?
Well, Ward in this case, he had at least 3 opportunities that game to score. They definitely have, Baker and Hind have been the only players to score for the Bobcats this year, but Ward has had plenty of opportunities, and now they're definitely ready to break through. Doig can score, Ward can score. There's definitely opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, I think against any other team, the Bobcats would have won that game. Like you said, Julian Petrello was unreal. He just won MAC Defensive Player of the Week. So, I mean, he's on a hot stretch. But like you said, I think they're ready to break through as well. Simon Hind had 2 really good opportunities. Toby Esch had 2 shots on goals, both off headers. James Doig, they're getting better at set pieces. Doig, who's always taking the set pieces in the corners, his balls are getting placed in there better. Ryan Scheidemann as well had 2 shots on goal. He's a huge spark off the bench, just a freshman from Brick, New Jersey. So it looks like they're getting a little deeper scoring. Like I said, against any other team, they would have won that game. But the fact that they ran into a really hot goalie in Petrello was a series of unfortunate events, to say the least.
Yeah, so I think I'm definitely confident that Coach Eric DeCosta can get them ready for games, and he's a good coach, so I think that they will have chances and improve throughout the season on the offensive end. I just think the improvement has to start coming sooner rather than later, or the season's going to be halfway through, and then you're going to be trying to get back up, be in panic mode, trying to get up back into the MAC.
Well, you guys touched on, actually, you really emphasized the fact that scoring has been a significant problem for this team. So how do you fix that?
I mean, I think it all comes, like Shane said, DeCosta's a great coach, and if you go to a men's soccer game practice, DeCosta says the word unlucky so many times. He notices how close they are, and the frustrations on the bench. I think once they break through, they're able to put more points on the board. But like going back to your point, how do you think they'll score better? I think it starts from James Doig again. The midfielder, the freshman from England, he can really put balls in the box, and I think it's all just about finishing. And once he sprays more balls in the box, and Esch can get his head on it, because Toby Esch is one of the taller players on the team, Esch and Hind, I think they'll be able to put more points on the board. But I think it starts from set pieces, because they haven't had a lot of really good opportunities when they're working their way up the field. So for sure, it starts with set pieces.
Yeah, and I think when you have Marshall Baker and Simon Hind, those are 2 people that all other teams are going to have on their scouting reports. Obviously, they're the only people who scored. So I think that those 2 players have to attract the defense and kind of dish it off to the other players and try and get them more involved as the season continues.
And as you said, Hind, who's always on the ball, he's had some incredible footwork, passes, plays throughout the season. He's really trying to dish the ball more so than he is trying to score at this point. And each player has a role to play. Like Connor said, Doig has had some very, very good feeds off of set pieces and corners. And like he said, it comes down to finishing in the box. When the ball's in the box, you got to finish. And a lot of the time, like he said, again, unlucky is really how I would put it. Watching the games, balls just far right, just far left, just out of over the corner. It's really just a lot of inconveniences for the team so far.
And I think defensively, Borjan Goya is doing a great job while they're trying to get through their offensive problems. I think he's really been sound. He's won the MAC Defensive Player of the Week a couple times. So I think until the offense gets going, the defense is going to have to continue to try and keep them in games.
Yeah, like you said, defense keeping them in games. That back line of Stevenson Hockey, Strangood, like you mentioned, Shane, Eric Panzer, Ashton Bett, they've been unreal, actually, I thought. I mean, and Goita makes the timely saves, but there hasn't been like that one example where they can bring up where the back line completely faulted on their marks or anything like that, and they've played very solid, especially with set pieces against the other team. They are tall. Stevenson Hockey is around 6'1", Toby Esch around 6'1", 6'2", so they are tall and they are physical. Eric Panzer is a big body, and he certainly threw his weight around in the Iona game. So for sure, I think the back line will stay good and Borja will stay good, and the only thing left to do is just figure out the offense.
Well, you talked about the back line and the defense for this Bobcat team. How important has the defense been for this team?
I think it's the reason why they have, somewhat a respectable record. If it wasn't for that defense, they would they would probably be losing games, 3-0, 2-0. But the defense is held strong to 0-0 ties. They've had a 1-0 win against Holy Cross. That was just off a PK, but that defense and Borja, they've really been the MVP so far this season for the Bobcats.
Yeah, that's been the only thing for the Bobcats this season. Like we said, the offense isn't there. The defense is what's there. Borja Angoita has made some unbelievable saves. He's really there. And even it's very difficult to break through our the Bobcats' defensive line. They have a lot of just full, strong areas, but really when a ball gets through to Angoita, it's hard to even score on him. So the defense has been everything so far.
All right. Thanks, guys. When asking anybody on the quad about Quinnipiac and Yale, the response is often associated with the bitter rivalry. However, the field hockey team has created a new association, philanthropy. Taylor Massey has more.
And it's all for a good cause, the National Foundation for Cancer Research for Breast Cancer.
Every year, the field hockey team raises money for the Susan G. Komen Foundation through their Play for the Cure game. The foundation is dedicated to spreading breast cancer awareness.
There's hundreds of teams who participate now at this across the United States. And all they ask is that you donate one game in your field hockey season to some sort of fundraiser for breast cancer and donate all the proceeds to Play for the Cure.
Through a raffle and other donations, the team raised $2,000 for a cause that affects many.
It really kind of hits home because there's numerous people on our team and on our coaching staff and at the university who have been affected by breast cancer. So to be able to come out here and to show our support, to raise money and then donate it to the Susan G. Komen Foundation is really, really huge.
In my practice where I work in the hospital, I work with breast cancer patients every Friday, either getting reconstructive surgery or just surgery for breast cancer. So I had a personal interest in, generating funds for a cause that I feel is extremely important.
According to national statistics, 1 in 6 women will develop breast cancer in their lifetime. This makes the cause all the more important for the female members of the Quinnipiac community.
So it's something as women they need to be aware of.
Every team at Quinnipiac has its own cause. Over the past few years, the field hockey team has certainly established its own.
Each team at Quinnipiac finds their niche in what they do, and we've kind of labeled this as our niche for field hockey. And I think it's something very important for life, what our athletes go on for life. It's not all about field hockey, it's what you do outside in the classroom and in your community.
Taylor Massey, Q30 Sports.
Thanks, guys, and thank you, Taylor. We'll be right back when we'll preview the men's ice hockey season coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Breakdown. Last year, the men's ice hockey team had a remarkable year, playing in front of sellout crowds, attaining a #1 ranking for the first time in its history, and even making an appearance in the national championship game. And after an encore in Europe, the band is back together. The team opens up its season in Alaska, but we got your preview right here. Marty Joseph, Mark Spillane, and Rebecca Castagna have more.
Hello, I'm Rebecca Castagna, and I'm joined by Marty Joseph and Mark Spillane for a Q30 Sports ECAC Men's Ice Hockey preview. So let's start with the USCHO.com poll that came out last Monday. Quinnipiac was ranked 10th, Yale 6th, RPI 15th, and Union 16th. So what do you guys think about the poll result?
It's kind of hard to say. I kind of like where Quinnipiac's at. I think that's fitting for them being there at 10th. Obviously, they proved themselves to be one of the better teams, if not the best team, over the course of last year before losing in the national championship game to Yale. But they lost a lot last year, so I think that's a good spot for them. I think it's a pretty good spot for Union as well. They lose Troy Grosenick, their goaltender, which we'll talk about. But Yale, I think they're a little bit too high. They've lost a lot as well. I don't think anybody realizes it. They lost Jeff Malcolm, their goaltender, and I think a lot of that ranking is based on just those 4 games at the end of the year that helped them win the national championship. And I think people might be overestimating how good of a team Yale really was last year. Not to say that they were a bad team, but they were really one of those teams that just got hot at the right time.
Yeah, agreed. And you said that they're 6th, and they also got 8 first-place votes for that #1 seed. So I think that Yale lost more than Quinnipiac. They lost their starting goaltender, who was probably the reason that they made it that far. They lost their captain, and they lost a lot offensively and defensively as well. They only have 4 returning seniors, so that says a lot there. Goaltending, besides Malcolm last year, was an issue. I think that's going to be the biggest thing this year. You don't know if Connor Wilson's even going to be that starting goaltender. You have 2 freshmen coming in net, so they have more question marks than Quinnipiac does. And like you said, it's a good spot for Quinnipiac as well, because you don't really want to have that high number putting too much pressure on you returning, especially Quinnipiac losing 11 seniors like they did last year. So kind of a flying under the radar sort of thing to start off the season. And then I think RPI and Union are a pretty safe bet there in the 15 and 16 slots as well.
What about any teams that I didn't mention? Who do you think might surprise us this season?
Well, I think Cornell's going to be there. I don't know if it's going to be much of a surprise because Cornell usually is always there. And I mean, last year they were a pretty disappointing year all around. They came into the season number 4 in the poll, and they just, from that point on, really slid all the way down. They got a little bit hot towards the end of the year, started getting some wins strung together. They ended up making it to the semifinals. They were a goal away from beating Quinnipiac in the semifinals. We all remember that game. So I mean, I still think even last year, I think Andy Isles, talent-wise, is the best goaltender in the ECAC, and they have him returning. And it's a conference that lost a lot of goaltending last year. Him and Kasdorf are really the only 2 odds-on number 1 goalies coming in for these teams. And if you look at them right now, I think they're probably the most dangerous. They have a couple of sophomores that are really talented that are coming in. Juniors as well, they have a lot of leadership. So I would look for Cornell, a team that's not in that top 20.
I would agree with Cornell as one that can really make a run. Another would be Harvard. They're bringing in a fantastic freshman class. I think it was ranked 7th in the nation by a couple of different magazines in the beginning of the year. Easily the best incoming class in the ECAC, ahead of Yale, ahead of Quinnipiac, ahead of a couple other schools like Cornell. So Harvard might have a chance to make a run. A lot of those freshmen are going to have to step in and contribute. They only scored 73 goals last year during the course of the entire season. That was 2nd worst in the ECAC, 1 ahead of Dartmouth. So unless those freshmen can really make a big step, they're going to struggle, but I expect them to because they are so good. I think that's a team that everybody needs to watch out for. They're going to score some goals this year.
Yeah, and they could be one of those young danger teams that could knock some people off late in the season. You said they didn't score a lot of goals this year, but they do have that good recruiting class, and there are some players on that roster returning that can score goals. And you saw last year there were games where they would put pucks in the net and they couldn't keep pucks out of the net. So it's really that balanced consistency of both offense and defense that's going to be the story of that team, and it's really the story with a lot of young teams as well.
Which players should we look out for?
There's a couple. I mean, you look around the ECAC, and we'll start right here in Hamden at Quinnipiac. Michael Gartig's one guy that you have to look for because it's all going to be about, for Quinnipiac, whether or not he can come close to replacing what Eric Hartzell did, because the Bobcats are going to score more goals this year than they did last year. And defense might be a bit of an issue. Connor Clifton's going to be a big addition for the Bobcats. He's another one to look out for on defense as he comes in playing for the U.S. developmental team over the past couple of years. He's someone to look out for, but it's really going to come down to Gartig in net for the Bobcats. And then you look around the ECAC, more goalies. Jason Kasdorf for RPI, you mentioned him, Marty. He was the freshman of the year last year, the rookie of the year in the ECAC. I think he might win goaltender of the year this year. It's probably going to be between him and Isles, who we've mentioned for Cornell. Isles, another one. Alex Lyon, the freshman goaltender that's coming in for Yale, probably will take over the starting spot from Connor Wilson, who really struggled last year. So I think it's really going to be a year of the goalies in the ECAC if you look around to see who's going to be the key players.
Yeah, and I have 4 others with that, and 3 of them actually come from one team. I like Max Novak, Josh Juris, and Shane Gossesbear from Union. Those are 3 players that are going to pretty much make or break that team. Max Novak, I think, is one of the most underrated players in the ECAC. He's one of their big goal scorers. He's going to come in junior year. I think he's really set for him to carry that offense. And another team to look at, a player, is Brian Ferlin from Cornell. He's going to enter his junior year. He had a really strong developmental camp with the Bruins, and they were even saying he was a few steps away from actually making an NHL roster. So, well, not an NHL, an AHL roster, but still, players like that who don't have a lot of big spotlight on them, like the Yales or the Quinnipiacs coming off those years, teams like that are who are going to be dangerous, especially Cornell and Union.
Shane Gossesbear is a guy who I think a lot of people are expecting to maybe be a dark horse candidate for a Hobie Baker nomination at the end of the year. It's going to be difficult for him because of the way he plays and the style of play of Union. They're not one of those high-flying teams like a North Dakota or a Boston College for them to be able to put up the kind of numbers that he might need. But he definitely is a dark horse candidate, and Max Novak, you said it. He's a guy last year, we saw him in Atlantic City at the ECAC semifinals and finals where he put up a couple of goals in both games to help Union win the whole thing. A couple of breakaways where he just blew past defenders, right in on net, made nice quick shots to beat those goaltenders. He's somebody that you said it, underrated, I think is the perfect way to describe him. We've watched him succeed over the past couple of years, and nobody seems to talk about him.
And he was, if you remember, he was the player who got that breakaway in the game against Quinnipiac in the semifinal game in Providence. And if he scores that goal, we always said, who knows what happens in that game?
Totally different game.
So he has speed, he has skill, and I think he's really going to be one of those players to watch.
Yeah, and you mentioned some freshmen. Which freshmen do you guys think will come out big this year?
It's tough to say because it's so hard to really base something around a freshman. But obviously here at Quinnipiac, you got a couple of really highly touted freshmen coming in Peter Quenneville and Connor Clifton. Those are the easy ones. They're both drafted. Connor Clifton, obviously the first Quinnipiac player ever to have a U.S. development camp under his belt before even coming to Quinnipiac. So it's those are definitely your two that you're going to look at if you're a Quinnipiac fan. But I think the two biggest freshmen are the goaltending situation for Yale, and Alex Lyon and Patrick Spano. That's going to be their make or break this season. If they struggle again in their goaltending, like they did with the exception of Malcolm last season, they're never going to be nowhere near the top of the ECAC. And we know how key goaltending can be in this conference specifically. And you've seen teams that have had their number one goaltender go down and really never be able to recover. So I think goaltending is what the conference really sort of strives off of, is goaltending and defense. It's not really one of those high-flying conferences like Hockey East. You can't really match them offensively. If you go punch for punch, they're going to beat you. So these teams really do rely on their defense and goaltending, and I think if you look outside of Quinnipiac, I think those two freshman goaltenders for Yale are going to be the two biggest freshmen to watch in the conference.
Well, the goaltending and defense was the formula for success for the Bobcats last year, and I think you're absolutely right about Yale. Spano, I think, is a guy who can challenge Lyon, but I do think Lyon's probably the favorite to take that top spot away. I would be shocked if Connor Wilson came in, and not just to say that he will start from the beginning, because he might start the first few games, but if he was the starter for the year, I would be absolutely shocked. Everybody remembers last year when Yale came into Quinnipiac for that nationally televised game. He looked totally out of it in that first period. The Bobcats put up 3 in the first period, a couple within the first few minutes, and the game was over like that. And he really didn't have a response for them. And that's not to say that he hasn't improved upon last year, but he's a guy who just didn't look like he'd be able to carry the Yale Bulldogs. And if not for Jeff Malcolm taking over once he finally came back from that injury, obviously Connor Wilson was playing because of that Malcolm injury, the Bulldogs don't win that national championship. So it'll be interesting to see if Wilson's able to keep that spot. But I think if you look around Harvard, we talked about them. Sean Malone, Phil Zalanka, and Alex Kerfoot. Those are the 3 guys that I'm looking at. I mentioned that top 5, top 10 recruiting class that people have been talking about, the best in the ECAC. It all starts with those 3. If those 3 can come in and score right away, that's going to make them a dangerous team. We've talked about it. Young players, sometimes they take a big step forward. They don't really know what's going on. They just play well under the spotlight, not even realizing they're in the spotlight. Or they just don't take that step. So it'll be interesting to see if Harvard is the team that doesn't take that step or the team that takes the big step and surprises everybody this year. And it starts with those 3, I think.
Yeah. And you mentioned Peter Quenneville and Connor Clifton for Quinnipiac, but who are the other key players for Quinnipiac this year?
Well, there's a couple. I think Sam Annis is one that he could have a good year this year. He scored in the first exhibition game for the Bobcats. But really, I don't know how much is going to be made of the other freshmen coming in for the Bobcats, more so the players that haven't played that aren't fresh. Tom Hilbrick is an example. His brother Christian plays up at Cornell, has been playing there for 2 years. He's a forward. Tom's a defenseman, and at 6'6", he has to be able to make an impact for the Bobcats. He could be similar to Mike Glakar a la 2 years ago for Quinnipiac, a big stay-at-home defenseman that is just an enforcer on the blue line, brings some size to the team, because the Bobcats are a little bit undersized in comparison to a lot of teams. They're going to need a guy like that with the losses of Mike Dalhusen, Zach Curry, obviously an offensive type guy, but a lot of defensemen leaving. A guy like Tom Hilbrick should be able to help out going into what is now technically his sophomore year.
And I'm going to go right off of that saying with size, and I think one guy to look at is Bryce Van Brabant. He brings that size to the offense, and he really, when he's on, he's hitting everything in his path. He's getting to the front of the net. He's getting to those dirty areas where a lot of the smaller forwards and Quinnipiac don't like to go. So if he can keep where he picked up sort of the last part of the year, he started to get hot along with Jordan Samuels-Thomas. Those two players play with each other really well. So their size and their strength in the corners will be huge for a really smaller, quicker offense in Quinnipiac.
And this is something you and I have talked about. Bryce Van Brabant, maybe Travis St. Dennis, maybe Jordan Samuels-Thomas as a potential second line for the Bobcats. St. Dennis, a small, quick guy, not afraid to go into the corners much the way Van Brabant is. JST, as they call him, Jordan Samuels-Thomas, wants to kind of hang out, find those open areas, and rip those shots on net. He's definitely a goal scorer, led the team in goals last year. I think he does the same easily this year, might even approach something like 25 goals this year for the Bobcats. I know that's something he's probably thinking about, shown over the past year or so that he wants to be a goal scorer. And I think pairing him with Bryce and with Travis St. Dennis is a perfect combination for the Bobcats. But Peter Quenneville's into the equation as well. We could see him on the second line. You never know what Coach Pecknold's going to do.
But you look at the second line last year, and Jeremy Langlois, Clay Harvey, and Russell Goodman, not necessarily the most talented line, but they were probably consistent wise, they were probably the most hardworking line on the entire team the whole season long. So they picked it up right in that first Cornell-Colgate weekend where the streak took off. So, I mean, if it doesn't necessarily have to be the most talented line because you have the talent in Pecker and the Joneses. If they work hard and they get in those areas and they produce goals, that's the way the team's going to thrive.
Do you two have any favorites?
I think Union's going to win the conference again. I think they're that good. They have, strangely enough, they still have 13 returning players from that team that went to the Frozen Four 2 years ago. And not a lot of teams. The Quinnipiac lost 11 from last year's team. So they still have 2 years of experience from a Frozen Four. And they know that they could have played better in that game against Quinnipiac last year. Quinnipiac had the number all season long. And you got to believe that Quinnipiac and Yale are two people that are that everyone's gonna want a piece of going into this year. So I think Union is a team definitely look at as a favorite, but Quinnipiac and Yale up there too, and I think Cornell is gonna be dangerous as well.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the 4 teams. I don't think Harvard's going to be able to stay with those 4 teams because of the amount of freshmen that they have. Next year, maybe the year after that, look out for the Crimson, but not this year. Cornell, with Andy Isles in net, every single night they have a chance. We have agreed on the fact that we think he's probably the best goaltender in the ECAC. Kasdorf is right there with him, but Andy Isles, because of his experience, is probably still has the top spot. And Union just knows how to win. They know how to win these things. They've done it 2 years in a row. There's no reason to think they can't do it again. They've been in the tournament 2 years in a row. They've played against big-time competition. They dismantled Boston College on national television in front of everybody last year. They're not afraid of anyone. They're not going to be afraid of Quinnipiac or Yale, especially coming into this building or going into Yale's arena. They're not going to be scared of them. I don't think Yale has the stability in net to be able to compete. So I really do think it comes down to Union, Cornell, and the Bobcats, because I think Gartig is proving to be and will continue to prove to be throughout the course of the year a formidable replacement for Eric Hartzell, and they're going to score a ton of goals. I think it's the Bobcats.
And one thing that maybe not a lot of people are taking into consideration when thinking about this, where the championships are going to be held this year. In Lake Placid. Normally it's down in New Jersey, and Quinnipiac and Yale have that travel. It's going to be up north where Cornell and Union are going to have a lot of fans come out to those games so they make it there. The one thing that still hasn't had me sold on RPI yet is that you hear all this stuff in the preseason about how good they're going to be and how good their goaltending is. Sure, they were hot in the late stage of last year. They ended up going, surprisingly, the second team in the end of the regular season in the ECAC. Not a lot of people saw them. They really came out of nowhere. Remember, we looked at the standing at the end of the conference. They made it all the way up to second. It was unbelievable. But I think their biggest thing is that line, a top line of Neil, Haggerty, and Liberty. They had 84 points combined last year, and they were all freshmen. So if that line can pick it up, that's what they're going to need to impress, because we know that they can keep pucks out of the net, and we know they have the goaltending, but can they score goals? And I think we're going to get an early test what they're made of right away in their first 5 games at BC, at BU, and home against UNH. So those are 3 teams that are in the top 10 of the national polls all season long. So those are definitely some. Kasdorf's going to be tested. Yeah, he's going to be tested really early.
Well, that does it for our Q30 men's ice hockey preview. For Marty Joseph and Mark Spillane, I'm Rebecca Castagna. Back to you.
Well, that's going to do it for us today here on Breakdown. I'd like to thank our analysts, Connor Fortier, Connor Voss, and Shane Doyle. And I'd like to thank everybody who worked behind the scenes to bring us today's episode. You guys work so hard day in and day out, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. And from us to you, thank you for tuning in. Have a great night. We'll see you next week on Breakdown.